Hello, my graduate students, my favorites. This is Dr. Harvey, and I've got Chapter 7 for you this week. This is the last chapter before your midterms, and then we have spring break, which I know you're all looking forward to. So let's go ahead and get through this. It is not that difficult because the local government's relationship with the state legislature is mostly at the appropriations level. Most of the things that you pay for at the local level. So it's very rare that you would need a state grant to get things done. However, some of you are going to be running agencies. Some of you are going to be running bureaus, things like that, inside the state of Texas, inside whatever state you're in. And you're going to need to know how to do this and how to advocate for yourself at the state level. And you're also, some of you are nonprofit. That's my background as well. And you're going to want to go down and advocate for your particular social need typically for funding. Also, that they don't make laws that impede your ability to work. So let's go ahead and get started. State legislatures matter. What do? They make laws. Those laws affect you. They make regulations. Those regulations affect you. In fact, Governor Greg Abbott, right now, as we speak, put a hiring freeze on all state agencies pending the new legislative budget. So the Legislative Budget Board in Texas has to come up with a budget, and the governor has line item veto power in Texas, so he can go through and he can strike funding for this or funding for that. It's typically ideological, so he'd go in and Texas has already defunded Planned Parenthood a long time ago, but that would be one of the things that he might cut. He or she, whoever the governor is, tends to cut things that that they consider government waste, or they consider ideologically incongruent with their values. So states make laws. They make laws that affect you. Then the agencies make the rules based on the laws. But this is why there are often people that go down to testify to say, okay, this is a good idea or a bad idea. The big thing is appropriations. They control the purse strings. So they determine how much your agency gets. A lot of you are at the local level, and you function not on state government money. You function on local government money. You function on property taxes. You function on sales taxes. But appropriations still matters. Elections and political control. They handle this at the state level. In fact, the Constitution of the United States makes sure that elections are a state matter and they're handled at the local level. And they focus on problems and the needs of the state in response to the constituents. So what they focus on is what we tell them to focus on. So that's something to keep in mind. Engines of democracy. They're responsive to constituents. When I say constituents, we also remember those interest groups we talked about last week. An interest group is basically a collective group of constituents that have some political capital. They best reflect the diversity of citizens. They live and work among the constituents. So the state government is the government level next to the local government that's closest to the people. And they have a public service role. Their job is to get things done. At the state government level, they do not have the luxury. And I just use Texas as an example because most of you are Texan. Most of you are living and working in Texas, and Tarleton State is a Texan university. We are the Texans. So I use Texas as an example. We are what is known as a pay-as-you-go state, which means that the comptroller sets an amount of money we are allowed to spend based on projected revenue. It tends not to be conservative. It tends not to be liberal. They tend to try to get it as close to accurate as possible. And the reason why is it needs to be because we need every cent to fund what we have to fund. Things like CPS, things like intrastate, our portion of highways. The federal government pays for some of that, but we pay for some of that too. So we don't have the luxury of partisan quarrels. People are more likely to reach across the aisle in state governments than they are at the federal level. Bicameral legislature. Every legislature except Nebraska is bicameral because two camerals are better than one. Basically, a bicameral legislature is two chambers, an upper chamber and a lower chamber. It was based upon the UK's House of Lords and House of Commons. The Senate, as you know, is a statewide popular vote, and the House is district votes. So you vote for your representative based on your district, and you vote for senator statewide. And this is to make sure that the needs of a particular area do not supersede the needs of the state. So we don't want something that is a regional concern in a more populated region. For example, Harris County has millions of people in it. And if there's an issue in Harris County, we don't want that issue just because they have more people and more representation because they have more people to take over the entire state. So that's where the Senate comes in. In other states, we have single-member districts here in Texas, but some states have multi-member districts. Single-member district, the plurality vote gets the seat. Plurality just means more votes than any other candidate. A majority means 50% plus one. Plurality is just, okay, maybe we had 4 people running and this person only got 40% of the vote, but 40% was the highest percent, therefore this person is now your new representative. That's how a single member district works. That's how we do things in Texas. But in several states, they have multi-member districts. And that is, you have 2 representatives from this district, which means that if it is majority Democrat, but the Republican is close within, like, is the next highest number, that gets the next highest number of votes, you have both a Republican and a Democrat. The perks of this are that both ideologies are represented here. So what means if, the Republican gets, let's say, 51% of the vote, and the Democrat gets the other, 49%. That means 49% of people are not adequately represented. So multi-member districts are intended to make sure that people are more adequately represented. Macro versus micro level competition. Okay, what happens at the federal level seems to be paralleled at the local level. Like in the year 2000, people came out hard for Republicans. When elections are more partisan and closer and more competitive at the federal level, they tend to be more competitive at the state level. Some offices have no political competition. In some places, you have people that routinely run unopposed. Texas has no term limits, and we have some offices where they're routinely unopposed. There are no elections, and that is because that district is so red or so blue. There's nobody that's going to be willing to put up their time and their money and their effort to be a loser. That's kind of what it comes down to. There's also the incumbent advantage. The incumbent advantage, as we know, is name recognition, and people assume, you were elected for a reason. You were elected for a reason. If it ain't broke, let's not fix it. So the incumbent advantage means that whoever is seated in there is much more likely to remain seated than someone running for a position for the first time, running for office for the first time. So this map, I'll let you look at it on your own, is the percentage that have both chambers of the House and Senate, both chambers, under the control of one party. Texas has pretty much been red since the year 2000. The Republican domination in Texas has happened since the year 2000. And you'll notice we've got this red belt down here, and then things get a little bit more dicey. The voting in state legislative elections. Districts are roughly equal within the state. The size varies between states because some states are more populous than other states. But on average, 57,000 people per House district. So one representative represents 57,000. One senator represents 157,000. Districts, because they have got to be contiguous, you have got to, when you draw district boundaries, even if there's gerrymandering, when you draw district boundaries, those districts they have to be contiguous. So they have got to be, it's kind of hard to explain, but you know what I mean by contiguous. They can be in amorphous, crazy shapes. They don't have to be like with clear lines and clear boundaries, like how we have, rivers and things like that, or county lines and things like that. They have to be equal in size, but they don't have to be drawn in a way where they are diverse at all. They are very homogeneous. When redistricting, you've got to, according to the Supreme Court, follow the rule of one person, one vote. So Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment says that everybody cannot, no person can be deprived of life, liberty, or the pursuit of happiness without due process, and that means that everybody has to be treated equally under the wall, under the, sorry, under the wall, under the, that's funny, under the law. So we've had issues of malapportionment. Malapportionment means, mal means bad, apportionment means the portion. We had this issue before 1962. There was major redistricting during the 60s. Part of this was because this was before we had the Voter Rights Act in 1965. And that was intended to get rid of a lot of attempts where when boundaries were drawn, they were drawn around segregated areas to specifically disenfranchise Black voters. So redistricting is basically the drawing of new districts. We do this after each census. They must be, like I said, geographically contiguous, and they must be substantially equal in population. They must take race and ethnicity into account. However, it cannot take race and ethnicity into account exclusively. That is unconstitutional. According to the Supreme Court, race can be a factor, but it cannot be the only factor. We like this whole idea of majority-minority districts because that gives minority groups a little bit more representation. Instead of having their interests diluted by the fact that they are a minority, by having a majority-minority district, you have a representative more likely to be a minority and more likely to answer to the needs of minorities. And of course, gerrymandering, everybody knows that term. Gerrymandering is when legislators redistrict to favor a political party. So those that are in power, and this is what happened in Texas. In Texas, after the census, the Republicans had power. The Republicans came in, and they essentially got themselves, I think, 6 or 7 more seats. And the Republicans have had the supermajority in Texas ever since. So this map shows the number of state legislator redistricting criteria by law. Texas is on the lighter side. Texas has a lot of leeway. In order to prevent redistricting, by the way, there was a mass exodus of Democrats following the 2000 census, where they pretty much ran off to Louisiana, Oklahoma, Arkansas. They ran out of the state so they would not be under the Republicans' callback because they did not want us to have quorum. They knew if that we had quorum that they were outvoted and there would be redistricting, and that would knock several Democrats out of power. And that's precisely what happened. Now, paradox of competition in state legislative elections. Small states and small living patterns leads to more homogeneous districts. So you're not going to have a lot of diversity in a smaller area. Redistricting further homogenizes because that's the goal of gerrymandering. We want people to be as alike as possible. We want them to be as red as possible or as blue as possible. When I say we, I'm talking about the people that are redistricting. But it's mostly reflective of party balance. And that is the president loses, the party of the president typically loses midterm election seats. However, state legislatures do not follow, they follow the same election schedule. They don't necessarily follow the same schedule of when they elect their representatives. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, women in the state legislature. About 24% of state legislators are women. They're more likely to be Democrat. This varies among states. There are fewer and high-paying professionalized legislatures. They're less likely to be women in certain state legislatures because there is a bias towards, I don't know how to put this in a way that's not offensive at all. Let me give you an example. In Texas, a representative earns $7,000 a year. $7,200, I believe, is the exact amount that a representative earns per year. You are, if you're in a citizen or hybrid legislature, a citizen legislature is one with low pay. Hybrid is one with low pay and maybe high retirement benefits. But if you're in a citizens legislature, you're more likely to attract women because only women that are in positions of being stay-at-home moms, for example, or extremely well off, like business owners. Dr. Donna Campbell is an example. She's a doctor, she's a senator. So either you have got to become from money in Texas, or be so successful that you have the ability to leave your job for 90 days every 2 years, bare minimum. There are fewer of these women in high-paying professionalized legislatures because it is more considered a job. And here is a map that shows the influx of women in legislatures, female lawmakers from each party. So these are the Republicans and these are the Democrats. A lot of this, I think, could have to do with Emily's List. It is a nonprofit that seeks to elect females to legislative positions as long as they hold a pro-choice viewpoint. So there's a lot of money if you're a female and you're pro-choice. Now there's the equivalent, which is the Susan B. Anthony List. Susan B. Anthony was an anti-abortion, everyone knows who Susan B. Anthony is. And they are electing, anti-abortion females to the legislature. However, they don't have nearly as much money. So that could be a part of it. That's just my theory. So don't take that. That's just Dr. Harvey's theory. So take that for what it's worth. So here are the rankings of the states with the percentage of women in both chambers. And I think a lot of this is partisan, because if you look, the darker, actually, that's not true, because Arizona is a red state and it's pretty dark. See, I would see blue states and red states here, because this would be like the red belt and this would be like the blue belt. So I do see, if I were to do a statistical analysis, I could prove a correlation between partisanship, just like that last graph did, and females. But we have a little anomaly right there in Arizona, I think. So, sorry you guys can't see that. 3 jobs of the state legislature: lawmaking, consider and fix public problems through legislation, sponsored by a lawmaker, assigned to a standing committee. What is a standing committee? A standing committee is a committee that is created to organize the regular everyday affairs of the legislature. So if it has anything to do with spending, it has to go through appropriations. If it's health and human services, it goes to health and human services. If it's education, it goes to education. So these, in calendars, everything has to go to the calendars committee in the House of Representatives to be put on the right calendar. So they do information gathering, hearings, recommendations. They mark up the bill and they vote. They can either leave the bill alone or they can vote. If they vote it out, it's sent to the chamber floor. There it's debated and voted upon. If it passes, it's sent to the other chamber, follows the same process. Every bill has a Senate companion or a House companion. If it passes both, it's sent to the governor, but not before going to the conference committee. The conference committee is that committee that reconciles the House version and the Senate version, because the governor can only sign one version. So, oversight of the executive branch. The executive branch is supposed to oversee the implementation of the law. However, there is something called rulemaking. Rulemaking are the bureaucrats, that's you and me, babe, bureaucrats that actually create the rules to enforce this law. In Texas, unless there is an emergency clause in the legislation, law is going to affect 90 days after the end of the at the end of the legislative session, typically September 1st. And that's because we need time to work this out as bureaucrats. They are supposed to reinforce the legislative intent. That's why there's a statement of intent with all of these bills. And there's ex post oversight. Ex post is the opposite of ex ante. Let me tell you, there's McCubbin and Schwartz, which is an article I don't think that I assigned to you, but it's called Fire Alarms and Police Patrols. So McCubbin and Schwartz said that there are 2 types of oversight. One is a police patrol. It's, you're supervising, you're making sure everything's going correctly. For example, audits, sunsetting provisions, where a law will cease to exist if it's not re-examined and reaffirmed in the legislature. We do have sunset laws in Texas. And then there's a fire alarm. A fire alarm, you know, fire departments do not crawl around the neighborhood waiting to see smoke. They stay ready to jump into action when they get a fire alarm, when they get a call. So these are whistleblowers. These are ombudsmen. That's your fire alarm. Your police patrol is your accountability that's baked right into your bill. So representation. To represent the interests of the residents, both the residents of Texas and the residents of your particular district, to benefit the people and businesses of their own district. Guys, this is known as rent seeking. Rent, like you pay your rent, rent seeking. Pork barrel projects, that is just getting large chunks of money for what it is you need to do. Casework and communication. Casework is little old lady calls their representative because they're having some issues and asks the representative to fix that particular issue of problems in their district. A good example of casework at the federal level is when I needed an emergency passport because I was going to Canada for a research project, and it was after 9/11, and I made the mistake of believing that my race seal birth certificate, which had just worked for me to go on a cruise to Mexico, was sufficient for me to cross the border into Canada. It was not. So I got a passport in 24 hours, less than that actually. I had to fly to Houston for it, but I got it done, and I can thank Senator John Cornyn for that one. Some also represent certain classes of people more broadly. So there's the Texas Silver-Haired Legislature, and that is just an interest group for residents over age 65. So these states are rated the powers of the legislative administrative rule review committee powers. Okay, so this is oversight, legislative veto, advisory legislative veto, can't impose cause or suspend rules. Let me look at this a little closer, guys, because I'm not quite sure what they're talking about on that one. I apologize. I read the chapter and I can't remember. State agency influence over rulemaking, the utility of ex ante. I have a feeling that this is sunsetting, but I will look into it and let you guys know. Okay, so collective action problems. They divide themselves along policy type and policy lines. There are some policies where there will just never be a compromise. There will never be a compromise on abortion. That's never going to happen. People are either for it or they're against it. And those that are for it are going to protect it, and those that are against it are going to fight it, period. That's the bottom line. There are certain issues that we are just at an impasse. We're just at a stalemate. Parties are the ones that assign lawmakers to groups, sign up for chairs of committees, party caucuses, majority, minority whip, House, Speaker of the House. In Texas, we elect our lieutenant governor. It's not like how the vice president runs with the president as a joint ticket. In Texas, we elect our lieutenant governor, and our lieutenant governor is the Senate president, just like the vice president is at the federal level. Standing committees, like I said, they specialize in a policy area. They screen and mark up bills, and they include both parties. However, the chairs are typically appointed by the Speaker of the House or the Senate President, and typically reflect the majority party. Not just because there are more of them, but because the party in power wants to keep that power. Political party caucuses. There's majority party caucus, minority party caucus. Remember the term whip from back in high school? Majority whip, minority whip. Whip is basically whipping up the votes and keeping people along party lines. So political party caucuses are important because they help organize issues. So committee chairs, like I said, usually the majority party. Party caucus leaders, most powerful office. The Speaker of the House. The vote of the Speaker of the House is typically unanimous. That means if you have a majority Republican, those Democrats are still going to vote for a Republican because they know they don't have any other way out, and they certainly want to play nice. The Senate president, or the president pro tem, is typically the lieutenant governor. These people appoint chairs, set the agenda, control resources, see who's allowed to speak. The House Speaker is elected by members of their party. In Texas, we elect our own Senate president in the form of our lieutenant governor. Well, there we go. I hope that that was informational and helpful to you. And I look forward to seeing you guys at our Thursday night seminar. Thank you.